This video is brought to you by Squarespace. It's the 30th of July, an unbearably scorching hot day in Britain. And by that, I mean it was above 20 degrees and it wasn't raining for once. And I remember whilst I was sweating like a pig, I whipped out my phone and I typed into the group chat. I said, boys, I wonder if this Southport thing is going to get out of hand like the London riots. And then all of a sudden...
Scenes that are now happening daily in towns and cities across the country. Far-right mob.
Now, I tell you all this, not to say that I'm a genius and I called it on day one. I mean, I am. And I did, but rather how a combination of events, declining living standards, social tensions, years of racist rhetoric from senior politicians, all the way to misinformation from members of parliament. All of these things created a recipe, a perfect storm, leading to an eruption of far-right race riots all across the country.
Mosques and immigration centres targeted nationwide, violence, racist attacks, communities terrified. A wave of unrest fueled by racist misinformation.
The soul of the Western man is so broken that when the invaders slaughter your daughters, you do absolutely nothing.
You are the British National Party. You would accept you are what the Liberal elite call racist.
Yep, we are indeed what you call racist.
Now look, things like this don't happen in a vacuum, right? Barry didn't just wake up one morning and decide he's going to go brick a mosque. So what we're going to do for a good chunk of this video is go through how these conditions were created, how the table was set, starting with the 90s.
Would you think differently about me? If I was white,
Mate, growing up in the 90s and the 2000s, racism, it was a thing of the past. We watched Ainsley Harriott on the television. Your mum kept a bottle of reggae sauce in the fridge. We even wore these very cute black and white wristbands to just show how over racism we were.
Stand up. Speak up.
But you see, whilst we're all patting ourselves on the back, we have beaten racism. Very quietly, a group of unchill bros were organising.
A new flag flies over our land. Under that flag, foreigners make our laws.
From the ashes of the extremely racist National Front, the BNP was like a new far-right DLC. And they had some very overtly racist leaders in the beginning. However, under their new leader, Nick Griffin, they wanted to give racism a rebrand. Rather than the original tactic of focusing on like ethnic genetic superiority, this new BNP moved the conversation onto culture and rallied against multiculturalism. They started to say things like, oh, we're preserving British culture, protecting British jobs. But at the time, it didn't fool us. We could see what they were doing, and most of the country just looked at the BNP and laughed and carried on listening to Crazy Frog.
Get the Crazy Frog as video for your mobile and show it to your friends as often as you like.
In amongst their many anti-immigrant stances, one of their grievances would eventually embed itself into the future of mainstream politics. Before we go any further, I want to give a massive shout out to today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is undoubtedly the best, I'm not kidding, the best platform when it comes to making websites. Beautiful websites, ones that are perfectly tailored to you. With their new design intelligence, which combines the newest AI technology, plus their years of understanding and crafting beautiful website templates, you can now literally type in prompts to the AI and it will create a bespoke website to you and your brand. As well as that, their payment system. So if you're selling goods online and maybe you have customers all around the world, Squarespace takes so many different types of payments, it's now easier than ever. From Klarna to ACH direct debit, Apple Pay, and you can even do buy now, pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay. And also, the laborious job of writing product descriptions has got a whole world easier with Squarespace's Blueprint AI. You can just bang in a prompt, it will shoot out some text, you can tweak it and change it, and it will save you time and it's very good quality. So be sure to head over to squarespace.com/Jimmy the Giant, and to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain, use the code Jimmy the Giant. Anyway, back to the video.
The authorities are already alert to the danger posed by individual paedophiles. Now they're concerned that evidence from some local communities points to an even more sinister threat.
Around 2007, a story broke in the Sunday Times about what would eventually be called grooming gangs. It wasn't a legal definition that was used by the police. However, it was a term the media was using to describe groups of men who groomed children into doing bad stuff. I'll be using the term CSA to refer to said bad stuff. Up until this point, when they recorded data on CSA, day, police weren't specifically recording data and labeling it if it was grooming gangs or individuals, etc. They weren't really doing it like that.
It's one of the biggest recruitment tools for the far right. This issue of so-called grooming gangs was on the BNP manifesto way before it became so mainstream through the Times and others.
So the BNP were ahead of this story for a long time. And you might wonder, why is it the BNP really cared about this story in particular? Was it that they were, staunch women's rights protectors or like child abuse activists? No, it was because the perpetrators were brown.
But there could be a problem, couldn't there, for the police if they were to say this is principally done by Asian gangs? This could stir up racial tensions.
These are criminals. They should be treated as criminals. They're not Asian criminals. They're not Muslim criminals. They're not white criminals. They are criminals.
The BNP jumped on this story and focused on it as a specific topic around race and religion, noting that the perpetrators were Asian men. And in turn, the BNP would condemn Islam, referring to it as a wicked and vicious faith. The BNP from this story would actually gain some success in local small elections. But when it comes to the wider British public, most Brits said you can't condemn an entire race and religion for the actions of a few.
You know what it is? I'll tell you what it is. It's anti-Italian discrimination.
Now, before we get too deep into this, I want to go into this idea of the criminal rapist foreigner. So let's head over to America in the late 1800s to the early 1900s. Back then in America, it was Italians, right? You know them, with their pastas and their... Italians back then were facing nearly identical accusations, and it was mainly the media that would whip the public up into a frenzy around Italian immigrants. An anti-Italian sentiment grew amongst lots of Americans, leading to Italians being lynched. And what is worse is that you had the United States Secretary James Davis, who called for mass deportations, claiming that a Sicilian community have no wish to become part of American life. Even the sociology professor Edward Allsworth Ross stated, Southern Italy reveals a rank growth of ferocious crimes that go with a primitive stage of civilization. The immigrant rapist story is one that gets constantly reused throughout history over new immigrant groups. They take individual actions of people and then label an entire group responsible for it and report on it endlessly so it seems bigger than it is in reality. Because there is something very understandably emotive about the idea of a foreign person committing CSA or SA, because you can perceive it as the idea that your country very generously let them in and they are choosing to repay our generosity by grooming our children.
So these Muslim gangs, it's like an invading army has come into our country, its way through it with the full acceptance by our authorities.
And so back to the 2000s, this story of the grooming gangs was spreading. However, for the most part, it was regarded as fringe far-right propaganda. But then, in 2017, an infamous report would be released.
Now, a new report to be published next week will say that a disproportionate number of Asian men are convicted as part of grooming gangs.
After a number of very high-profile grooming gang cases, the Asian-run anti-extremist Quilliam Foundation released a report in which it concluded that 84% of grooming gang cases were committed by Pakistani Asian men, pinning it on their Muslim background, that these crimes were a product of their problematic beliefs in their culture and their faith. On top of that, it claimed that the reason the abuse went on for so long...
The police were fully aware, but they didn't want to make arrests because they were scared of being called racist.
This, in part, created the beginning of the two-tier justice claim that we would see and hear in the riots. Now, this fucking report, man, it was a perfect piece of propaganda. This report allowed people's natural xenophobia to be justified by moving the conversation away from race and towards culture. And so you didn't need to be some white nationalist to be scared that your kids would be groomed by an Asian Pakistani man. You didn't even need to be white.
I don't think people are concerned about the colour of people's skin, but I think the issue is it's a culture issue, isn't it? And it's a two-tier issue.
I mean, it's not the same country anymore. Well, just look around you.
Not that I've got anything against immigration, but you can't have too many people coming in.
It's a small island. There's no housing.
But if we can't look after our own, why should we be looking after others?
The timing of the Quilliam report was perfect. It was just after Brexit, which was a whole campaign based on reducing immigration, with images like this. Note how if you look at the skin colour of the migrants, they are all brown. Despite this whole thing being about the EU, where most EU migrants would not be brown, also note how this poster is very similar to Nazi propaganda of Jews in Germany. So the Brexit argument was that the EU are forcing us to take migrants who are stealing our jobs while simultaneously not working and living on benefits.
At the end of the day, right, I think that is a brilliant idea that we left the EU. There are some foreigners that are coming over and taking our jobs, yeah, and not even working.
However, what's annoying is that in reality, yes, the UK is fucked at the moment, but for very different reasons than what Brexit was trying to claim. For very large swaths of the British public, living standards since the 2008 financial crash have absolutely plummeted. Austerity and the many cuts to our public services have left many parts of the UK feeling very neglected and forgotten. And so in this economic condition, this context of scarcity, it can be very easy to convince people that foreigners are competing for your resource.
We haven't actually benefited from Brexit economically. We've mismanaged this totally. The perception is that the Tories have failed.
So you got to think, right, we have the Conservative Party and they have been in charge the whole time for fucking forever, it feels like. To the British public, they now need to explain themselves. Why has the country only got worse and worse as you lot have been in charge? And they can't just turn around and say, yeah, lads, you know, I'm sorry, we fucked it. It was our fault. I'm sorry. But there is a different tactic, and that is to find a scapegoat.
You can't say, oh, we're really sorry we've made you poorer and essentially made your lives a whole lot more difficult. So they try to focus anger elsewhere, i.e. on people of different ethnicities, people of different colours, people of different religions. And they do that by adopting far-right conspiracy theories.
In their panic, the Conservative Party started to dig out old BNP manifestos and had now entered their edgy 4chan era.
Does it help that a Prime Minister of this great nation would use the terms bank robber and letterbox to describe Muslim women who wear a burqa?
Well, you know, people, Philip, dig out all sorts of
You said it.
Islamophobia really grew out of the 2000s, right? And there's a lot of context as to why. 9/11 and the July 7th bombings didn't really help the situation. Some of the headlines are fucking insane, man. Look, read these. Calais, send in the army. The swarm on our streets. Fury over plot to let 1.5 million Turks in. We had a period of time we didn't like the Turks. The mid-2010s is where you're starting to see people like Tommy Robinson gaining popularity, as well as Nigel Farage and UKIP. And then on top of that, you had the Marks and Spencer's brand Tommy Robinson, Douglas Murray.
So these are just British babies whose parents happen to be Muslim, but so what?
There are some people who think that. Then there are some who think, well, there are also problems that will come along with that.
All of these lot, receiving far more media attention than they ever deserved, managed to shift immigration to the forefront of political discourse. Now, look, I'm sure anyone on the right has probably switched this video off by now, but don't be mistaken, don't conflate that I'm saying any conversation on immigration and asylum seekers is instantly racist. It isn't. If you want to talk about how the government has endlessly failed to invest into infrastructure for more people coming to our country in order to maximize the benefits of immigration and offset things like overcrowding, or if you want to talk about providing safe routes for asylum seekers so they're not sat in a hotel for 2 years waiting for their application to be decided, or if you want to talk about how asylum seekers are disproportionately placed into poor communities as opposed to wealthy communities that have more resource to look after them, if you want to talk about funding programs to help cultural assimilation, help people learn the language, get into jobs, if you even want to talk about investing more money so that we don't have labor shortages and need to rely on immigration, we can talk about that. But if your conversation is send them back, lock them up, or as ex-Reform UK candidate Andrew Parker puts it,
get the young recruits there, yeah, with guns on the beach, target practice, to shoot them.
The Quillian Foundation's report on grooming gangs opened the door for these old BNP accusations that Muslims don't belong in the West, that they don't want to assimilate, that they hate us, that they're taking your jobs, that they're all criminals, etc., etc. Despite the fact that you can argue against each of these claims on their own, because of the Quillian report and the legitimacy it gave, these old xenophobic tropes were just able to be assumed to be true. And it's so interesting that all of this coverage from the media, the anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, anti-refugee refugee, all of this coverage has resulted in British people, when they are surveyed, of migration being the topic that they are most factually incorrect about. We massively overestimate their crime rates, prison rates, asylum seeker rates, etc. All thanks to this propaganda we see every day in the media.
We have to face facts. There is a big problem with the views that too many Muslims hold in Britain. I mean, do you honestly think that the so-called religion of peace is here to assimilate and blend in, or not?
It's a problem that's plagued several UK cities. Gangs of predominantly British Pakistani men targeting vulnerable white young women and girls.
Now look, it would be a real shame if the Quilliam report, you know, the bedrock report that held up all of this anti-immigration stuff, was absolute dog shit. Now look, this would be too long for me to do the ins and outs. Lonerbox has done a really good video. I'll link that in the description, but I'll paraphrase it. Effectively, as soon as this report came out, academics blasted it due to the fact it literally didn't cite where they got their data from. They present all of these numbers with no way of other researchers being able to review and confirm those numbers. That is definitively pseudoscience. The Quilliam report claimed that they found 58 cases of grooming gangs and 264 offenders between the years 2005 to 2017. If we divide that number across the years, that means on average there were 22 cases a year. But these numbers mean nothing unless you have some context, right? So in 2016, 6,687 nonces were arrested for, CSA. So that means of 6,687 CSA cases, 22 of the offenders were in grooming gangs. I'm no fucking maths daddy, but that works out that grooming gangs make up for about 0.3% of all CSA. So we are looking at a fucking speck of dust on a camera lens, based on data that the Quilliam report gave no source of, other than claiming that they used extensive data mining methods, aka trust me bro.
My mind was sort of blown all over again at just how bad it was. So, in terms of their methods, they say, we use, extensive data mining methods, which is essentially meaningless. They don't report where their data come from. Actually, their methods section was a rehashing of another report's results. I mean, that is how bad it was. It looks like it came from media coverage. They'd basically gone through media coverage, cherry-picking cases that fit their predetermined conclusions.
But look, we actually do have very reliable data when it comes to the ethnicity of people convicted of CSA in general. White men make up 89% of all CSA convictions, whilst white people are 82% of the population. Asian men, who Asians make up 9% of the population, account only for 6% of all CSA convictions. In other fucking words, Asian men are underrepresented in CSA. They are less likely to do CSA. And look, I'm not the only one complaining about this fucking report. Loads of academics went and blasted it, and it led to the Home Office, so the government, doing a full review into this grooming gang story in 2020.
The Home Office released a report, which is kind of popularly known as the Grooming Gangs Report. And that report looked at the best available evidence overall, and it concluded that the majority of such perpetrators were white. It was because there was no kind of reliable, generalizable evidence, i.e. sort of representative at national level, to back up these deeply racialized stereotypes that have become so widespread. And the report also concluded that victims come from many backgrounds. They include boys, they include many children from ethnic minority backgrounds. So again, this kind of trope of white girls, in nationalist language, our girls that need protecting, it just doesn't stack up against the evidence.
Effectively, the data on this is terrible. It's so shoddy because it's based on just police choosing as and when they want to report on race, where most of the time they didn't report on it, and most of the time they did report on it, it was just them guessing. The geezer looks Asian, he'll stick down Pakistani because, Dazza doesn't have many brown friends. It also means that because the definition grooming gang wasn't a legal one, the way that these old reports choose to actually conclude that something is a grooming gang or not was based on the researcher, which is ripe for bias.
To the Quilliam quote-unquote study, that 84% of quote-unquote grooming gangs were Pakistani men. And this was verbatim reproduced in headlines by all of the mainstream media several years ago. And
I know we're really on a tangent here, but we have to go through all this. It is important because the Home Office report really was the worst of both worlds because it didn't definitively prove anything. But we can tackle the claim that the Home Office are politically correct and they didn't want to show this by looking at who conducted the report, who pushed for this. The man behind the report was Sajid David. This is the same man that tweeted that these sick Asian paedophiles are finally facing justice, and also was regurgitating the Muslim no-go zone myth. On top of that, the report was headed off by Priti Patel, who literally in the report said, "This is disappointing because community and cultural factors are clearly relevant to understanding and tackling offending." That is just her speculative opinion, and it's literally in the report that is being released that couldn't come to any conclusions. Just think realistically, like if there was bias, the bias was of these conservatives to prove that these people's ethnicity, religion, or culture is the core driving force behind grooming gangs, but they weren't able to achieve that. And like, it's so annoying about this whole grooming gang thing because there is a lot you can talk about when it comes to it. Tommy Robinson, who bangs on about grooming gangs, Nigel Farage, etc., if they wanted to talk about how austerity cuts have literally led to less nonces being put in jail, or how the police and the institutions failed the people being groomed by these gangs due to them being from poor working class backgrounds and assuming that they were basically rough girls going after quote-unquote bad boys. That's a conversation we can have. However, this speculation that has zero data to confirm it, that these people's ethnicity, religion, or culture is the core driving force behind grooming gangs, mixing this in with a constant barrage of why Islam is a religion of murder, refugees are bad, they're military-age men, stop the boats, etc., etc., then I'm sorry, mate, but that is why people call you guys far right. Not because you want to protect the children, but because you believe in an unproven conspiracy theory that has led you to scapegoating immigrants as the root of all of our country's problems.
But got to bring it back from the brink of Islamic takeover, whatever you want to call it, whoever takes over. It's just getting insane in this country.
What makes you say that? What makes you say we're on the brink of an Islamic takeover?
Watch the news.
We have a growing number of young people in this country who do not subscribe to British values, in fact, loathe much of what we stand for.
Are we talking about Muslims here?
We are.
All right, so we're nearly there, right? We're in 2024 now. Conservatives have gone fully all in on Islamophobia.
Foreign national offenders, rapists, murderers, paedophiles, you name it, along with asylum seekers.
Priti Patel, you know, that same person, she's writing this speech on immigration about all the small boats crossing, using the phrase which will become important, enough is enough. Rishi Sunak, as part of his campaign to become the Prime Minister, plastered the slogan, "Stop the boats," all across his campaign. And in his cabinet, he had even more radical voices.
So Suella Braverman has weighed in her inimitable style and said, Islamists are in charge of Britain now.
She wrote this exclusive in the Daily Mail, right-wing tabloid, claiming that perpetrators in grooming gangs, almost all British Pakistani. And she then went on to reduce victims to, again, I quote, overwhelmingly white girls from disadvantaged or troubled backgrounds. And she presented these claims as being facts. Now, the reason I describe what she's doing as overtly racist is quite simple. These things are not facts.
The former Tory Vice Chair Lee Anderson was saying things like this.
I don't actually believe that these Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is they've got control of Caen, and they've got control of London, and they've got control of Storm as well.
Nigel Farage, which I haven't even somehow gone into that much, but he was out there claiming that Muslims are a threat to the British way of life. But yeah, even with all of these pieces in place, Britain was yet to fully tip over the edge.
We've witnessed the normalisation of anti-immigration discourses, not just from the far right, but from those at the heart of the mainstream within the Tory party and the Labour Party as well.
So a few months before the riots happened, the far right had been getting emboldened by a number of events.
Ben Sillam Matthew, Liberal Democrats, 2016. Farage Nigel Paul, Reform UK, 21,225.
First, you had the political success of the Reform Party led by Nigel Farage. They got 5 seats and received a ton of votes. However, you have to remember, Labour won the election.
We did it!
Labour, to, like the far right, pretty much epitomises the woke Marxist left who are out to try and make your mum a transgendered Muslim Marxist.
The transgender thing is incredible. Think of it. Your kid goes to school and comes home a few days later with an operation.
In 2023 in Dublin, there's anti-immigration riots based on stabbings of some young children. There was the Manchester airport incident where young Asian men started fighting, police officer stamped on his head. Then on the 8th of July 2024 in Hare Hill, Leeds, a riot broke out over 4 children being taken away from a Romani family, taken into care by social services and the police. Tommy Robinson refers to the riots as imports.
Yeah, the Muslims are attacking the police officers.
There were then false claims that the rioters were not even arrested. It's untrue. Loads of arrests. 4 already been charged. However, it didn't matter. It fit into this kind of 2-tier policing thing because the police retreated. But the reason they retreated is because they were the sole recipients of the attack. The rioters weren't trying to attack the public, but specifically the police. And then, just days before the riots would break out, Tommy Robinson would have a rally on the 27th of July in London, where he illegally broadcast his film to a massive crowd, despite the fact that the film was subject to a court injunction due to the film making false allegations against a Syrian schoolboy. Boy, yes, I said schoolboy. A real man of character, Tommy Robinson.
They think they're putting me on trial. I just put you on trial to the world.
Tommy Robinson is then arrested, let out on bail, and the following day he leaves the country. And then the day later, the final straw would break the camel's back.
There's been a major incident in Southport this morning.
2 children have been killed in what police called a ferocious stabbing at a dance class in Southport in the northwest of England.
9 other children have been injured and 6 of them are in a critical condition.
This horrific attack instantly spread all over the internet. The far right on Twitter, Telegram, etc. went into overdrive to try and pin the attack on it being a Muslim refugee who came on a boat or something.
That's right, somebody arrived in the UK on a boat. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody knows where he's from. The media is, of course, hiding the fact that this is a 17-year-old male. They don't want to highlight how ridiculous it is that we allow military-aged males, combatants, to flood our shores. The soul of the Western man is so broken that when the invaders slaughter your daughters, you do absolutely fucking nothing.
Just 3 hours after the attack, a LinkedIn post from a man named Eddie Murray was claiming that it was a migrant who did the attack. If there's any time to close borders completely, it's right now. Enough is enough. Where did I hear that before? BBC News are lying. The child murderer was from Africa. He was on an MI6 watch list. His name is Ali Al-Shakati. There was a Telegram chat that was set up 6 hours after the attack called Southport Wake Up. Set up by a black neo-Nazi from Finland. Yes, the internet is a very weird place. And so with all of this going on, a member of parliament, Nigel Farage, posting a video before official information was released saying,
I have to say there are 1 or 2 questions. Was this guy being monitored by the security services? Some reports say he was. I just wonder whether the truth is being withheld from us.
And then to top it all off, Tommy Robinson sticks his fucking head in.
You've allowed people into our towns and cities that are raping their way through our towns. They're murdering our kids. Women are being daily from the fuckers that you've brought in. Stop the fucking boats.
At 1725, the police, in order to try and quell the misinformation,
A 17-year-old male who is originally from Cardiff has been arrested on suspicion of murder.
not a migrant, not a refugee. But at this point, the far right don't care. They don't care about facts. All of this misinformation spread at a moment where tensions were as volatile as they could be. The day after, on the 30th of July, an angry crowd started to gather in Southport, outside of a mosque.
A night when a protest, as it was billed online, outside a mosque almost instantly became this.
After 2 decades of scapegoating immigrants, stoking Islamophobia, the far right took to the streets.
On the streets, unrest began to spread around the country, with hundreds gathering outside Downing Street.
These riots they were shameful. They spread all across Britain, minus Scotland, which they will make sure that we say. So I said it's Scotland. Simmer down, lads. And man, it was horrific. Reports of asylum seeker hotels being set on fire, people going on Twitter saying, look, go to this mosque, go to this asylum centre, bricks being thrown at police, being thrown at mosques, random attacks on people who were just, not white, arson, looting, damaging graves of dead Muslim people. These riots, often organised under the name Enough is Enough, marching around chanting the Tory party slogan, Stop the Boats. On the 1st of August, the police revealed the identity of the killer.
Axel Rudakabana is 17, British, born in Wales and of Rwandan heritage.
Incredibly, the far-right grifterverse just doubled down and magically managed to pin the blame back onto Muslims. They were labelling Muslims who were coming out to defend their communities, calling them the Muslim Defence League, and just posting videos of them, like if they were holding weapons or if they're attacking white people, etc. Which, lads, let's be fucking adults. Should they have been doing that? No, obviously not. However, would they be doing that if people weren't trying to brick their mosques and burn down their communities? It's fucking obvious.
As dawn broke, the cleanup began. Neighbours and strangers grabbed brushes and brooms and got to work, surrounded by evidence of last night's events.
However, yes, by the 5th of August, the mass riots came to an end. Currently, from the last I checked, 1,590 people were arrested for their participation in the riots and 1,015 have been charged. And then again, these propagandists started jumping on this claim that there was two-tier policing, that Muslims were allowed to do things and they were just arresting the whites. It's not true. Loads of Muslims have been arrested for their participation in these riots. Obviously, these individual actions are to be blamed, but it's impossible to not look at these riots and just see the serious role that years of Islamophobia have played into causing them. I mean, when you literally have the owner of Twitter, Elon Musk, posting this, whilst constantly tweeting that Britain is now in civil war, eventually having to delete one of his tweets where he believed that the UK had made detainment camps on the Falklands Islands to arrest the rioters. It's from these tweets and his agitations of the riots that he is now not being welcomed into Britain. And instead of reflecting on his role and why it was so serious, he doubled down, tweeting that I don't think anyone should go to the UK when they're releasing convicted paedophiles in order to imprison people for social media posts. Where, I don't know if I need to debunk it, but no sex offenders had been released from jail. And this claim that people are being locked up for Facebook posts is a gross misrepresentation of what's happening. Usually they're referring to the wife of Conservative councillor Lucy Connolly, who in the midst of a race riot thought it would be a good idea to tweet, mass deportations now, set fire to all the fucking hotels full of the bastards for all I care. If that makes me racist, so be it. I mean, yeah, you can call it being arrested for a tweet. I would call it inciting racial violence.
Basically, they've taken all the expensive stuff. I was watching the CCTV, what's happening, and then the point they just coming in. My kids was watching as well, and it's sad. Yeah.
And I don't need to explain it to you how fucked these riots were and the fact that they cost us £230 million in damage. But we can rebuild things, right? But you know what is much harder to rebuild is the trust of the British Muslim community and any other immigrant group who's now starting to feel a bit scared. And on top of that, what really is the most disgusting part is the families of the children who died will forever remember that their children's awful tragic deaths were co-opted by racist rioters who went and attacked Muslims in this country. It pisses me off, man. It makes me embarrassed to share the same flag as these pricks. However, we cannot allow them to take British identity. It doesn't belong to them. We have to always come out and provide a strong pushback against these forces and provide a message that breaks down xenophobia and racism for what it really is. A tool used by the powerful to turn the powerless against each other in order to stall progress.
Thousands of people have taken to the streets of towns and cities across England in counter demonstrations against a wave of riots by anti-immigration protesters.
Over the last 7 or 8 days, if you happen to be Asian, black, mixed race, Muslim, you've probably at times felt concerned. I've taken calls from you. I'm worried about my wife and daughter going out to see their friends. I'm worried about my wife, she wears a head covering. I'm worried about this, I'm worried about that. Hopefully you've now seen the true face of Great Britain.
Can you tell us why you're here today?
In one word, solidarity.
If you enjoyed that video, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and jump on the Discord. We can talk about this much more. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.